Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses, where we talk about life, love, creativity, and all that spiritual stuff. My guest today is an award-winning writer and producer. He won a primetime Emmy Award for outstanding writing for a drama series for his work on The Sopranos. He developed, produced, and wrote the pilot of Dexter and was nominated for a Writers Guild of America Award for Best Dramatic Series. He also produced the award-winning movie The Positively True Adventures of the Alleged Texas Cheerleader Murdering Mom, that's a mouthful, which was nominated for 6 Primetime Emmy Awards. He is currently writing for Showtime, HBO. He's writing feature films and plays. He's always writing. And he is a gifted writer and happens to be one of my best friends. So I am thrilled to have James Manos Jr. on Glimpses.
Well, I'm glad to be here too, so thank you very much. And
This is a treat.
you too are one of my best friends, so
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad it goes both ways.
I do have to make one correction already.
All right.
But the Texas Cheerleader movie was nominated for 6, but it did win 3.
It
So
did win 3.
I thought I should mention that.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No.
You know,
Well, I cut that for length, but now we've
okay.
edited. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, you grew up in Brooklyn, New York.
Yes, I did.
Yes, you did. Okay. When did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, God. Well, it's a bit of an interesting story. My father was a rocket scientist.
Seriously.
Seriously, like he was one of those classic, Apollo 13 guys with white shirts, black ties, pencil pocket. He was designing F-105s in the 1950s with slide rules beyond me. And, he helped design the LEM that landed on the moon. So he was, so when I was a kid growing up and I came home from high school, junior high school, and they wanted me to add letters to numbers like 1A plus 2B equals, whatever. I said, that's impossible. I'm never going to do that. And I don't think my father ever liked me from that moment on because,
Because algebra wasn't the thing.
Yeah, but the interesting thing about my father was that he literally memorialized every single thing we did as kids and as a family on an old 8mm camera. Black and white, no sound, MOS.
Yeah, the old film.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. And I would say like once a month, we'd all sit together and watch all these home videos or home movies. And I remember when I was a kid, I must have been about 10 or 11 years old, and I watched this clip all the time, me and my mother in Massapequa. And my mother and my father was filming us, and we were by a lake, and my mother threw a bagel to a duck. And this is true. The duck literally swallowed that bagel whole. And like a Disney cartoon, it was sticking out of its neck. And you could see it. And the duck flopped over because it was choking to death. It couldn't fucking breathe. And my father and I started running around, scampering around. And my mother scampering around. And we're trying to get the duck into the water to try to, have him kind of bob his head into the water. And he started bobbing his. Now, my father never moved. He kept taking photos, shooting the movie. And the duck finally, after bobbing his beak into the water, literally, like, the bagel just disappeared into his gullet. It was like magic. It was like a Disney movie. And I always thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And I remember I walked into the kitchen one night, I guess I was at 12, and my mother was probably frying up some meat or something. And I said, yeah, remember that time we were in Massapequa and we almost killed that duck, but we saved it? And she said, what the hell are you talking about? I said, the duck, when you fed him that bagel. She goes, what are you talking? I said, what do you mean? We've seen it 100 times. She said, that wasn't you. I said, what? She said, oh, no, you weren't even born yet. That was a neighborhood kid that I was playing with at the time.
Oh, my
and
gosh.
And at that moment in my life, I must have been 12, I remember saying, oh, my, I could make up anything. It doesn't matter. It's my own truth. It's just... and if you say it with commitment, people believe you. And I actually believed all those years that was me as an 8 or 9-year-old boy with that duck and my mother.
That is incredible.
And I didn't act on that thought until late, I would say maybe in high school, I wrote a couple of short stories, but then in college, after I got into summer stock program in my sophomore year, when I almost failed out, that saved my life, and I started writing again.
You learned to be a story writer because you told the story about a duck and a bagel.
That was the first one, yeah.
And when you actually you said something about summer stock your sophomore, did you ever have ambitions to write, or did you want to act, or what?
I really wanted to act, and I also really wanted to direct. And I was very fortunate because that summer stock program when I went to college at Colgate, they brought in all these actors and all these directors from all over the world. Most of the actors were from New York, equity actors. So that was mind-blowing. You know, I was, 19 years old, maybe 20.
Right.
But there was one director who changed my life. His name was Ewan Smith. He was Scottish. And he was one of those classic guys who was tall, thin, with bad teeth, but he would drink like a bottle of scotch every night and smoke 5 packs of cigarettes and then run the next morning for 6 hours, And, we used to have all these parties, and for whatever reason, he took me under his wing. And he thought that I would become like a really good director. I don't know why he thought that, but he did cast me. Like my first play was the lead in the Thurber Carnival. Like I actually got to act and I loved it. But he spent a lot of time with me talking, and I used to watch him all the time when he was directing other plays that I wasn't in. And then he got me to study with him at the Royal Academy in London.
I was going to ask you one of my questions. A street kid from Brooklyn ends up at the Royal Academy studying as a director, right?
Yeah, it was mostly with him, it was.
Okay.
Because we did a lot of work done at the Embankment Theater. I remember that off the Northern Line. But it was a lot of play history and learning how to construct plays, that kind of stuff. It was pretty academic.
And were you thinking about writing plays, or were you only focused on directing?
I did. No, I was actually focused on both.
Okay.
And I ended up, it was a confluence of events in which I had to leave New York in a hurry up. Which I don't really want to get into right now.
I'm not going to ask you to talk, but we'll touch on that. But I don't want you to.
I ended up living in St. Croix for a year, and I was teaching English under an alias, of all things, at a high school. And I did write a play called Water Damage, which was a modern-day version of Noah's Ark.
Okay.
And the lead character was a guy by the name of Nick Waters, who was running an insurance company, and Jesus came down and said, you got to build an ark. and he had these 3 women, like the Supremes. Every time Jesus said something, the 3 women would kind of sing it, like they were in the Supremes. And, it bankrupted him, and he complained he wanted to bring his assistant, who was marrying his son, on board with them. And Jesus said, no, only you and your family. You can't bring this young girl, Angela. And he's like, I can't do that. I've got to. He said, no, it's just the way it is. You got just your family. And at the end of the play, after he exhausts himself and builds this thing and puts his whole family in bankruptcy and everybody thinks he's nuts, Jesus comes back down and says, yeah, we called it off. And he said, why? And he said, well, because since you loved Angela, we figured there's still so much love left in this world that we can't do it. And that was my take on Noah's Ark. And I wrote that and I performed it. And that was the first thing I really wrote.
So you played the Noah character?
No, I didn't. I just directed it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then I studied acting, with a teacher from the Playhouse, neighborhood Playhouse, for 2
Which
years. Phil Gushy, who was brilliant. And I ended up teaching with him. And I ended up teaching acting for quite a while, getting a lot of kids into actor studio. And then I proceeded to direct really, really bad plays for about 8-10 years here in New York, like off Broadway.
Listen, I directed plays off Broadway where there were more people on stage than in the audience.
I know the feeling. It was really, but I didn't stop.
That's your 10,000 hours. You've got your 10,000 hours.
I think so. I remember learning a real great life lesson. I was working at this director's company. I got to study with some really fascinating, like Harold Prince and Ruth Malachek from the, that experimental theater downtown in the village somewhere. I can't remember the name of it right. La Mama. She was brilliant. And so was Harold Prince and a bunch of other guys and women. And I remember back then in the early 80s when New York was really bad.
Right.
And I was directing some play, and I used to do detailed demolition or paint houses in Bed-Stuy at the time to make some money. So I'd be like in Bed-Stuy at 7 a.m. and painting, and then get out of there at 3, and then either teach an acting class or direct a play later that night. And I remember then that it was so brutal, New York. Walking down 42nd Street, and it was really crime-ridden, infested with all sorts of drugs. And I realized then that I was creating my own world within that theater and that I should inhabit it with only the people that I like working with. Because this is my world. So you might as well make it as fun as humanly possible, because once we're finished working for the night, we had to go back out into that world. And that stayed with me. I've learned to only work with people that I like working with, not necessarily if they're talented or not, but if they're really nice people and they strive for excellence, then I'm there.
You know, that is so true. The fact that likes attract, and you find like-minded people, and to get in a room with them and create a play, it's wonderful. And when it's not like-minded, or when they're making it about them as opposed to the story, then it becomes a problem. But I want to ask you something. You trained as an actor and a director. How did that training inform your television writing and film writing?
It was extremely influential, especially studying as an actor, because you learn really fast how actors approach the words that are written. Right. And you realize less is best, and you start understanding the real value of subtext. And to this day, I'm always shocked when I think I know all the subtext for every single line that I write, because, you know, like you've read a bunch of my scripts, and every script that you've read, clearly each page I've rewritten 10 times before you see it. And I think by that time I know all the subtext to each and every line. But I'm always shocked to this day when actors read my work and they find even more subtext.
Wow.
And you just want to jump out of your chair and hug them, because it's like, damn, you just made me better. And how do you do that? You know, I mean, they're just such magnificent, people who can pull that off. I think there's probably, if you make it as an actor, I can't think of a better life to have than that, because you're just filled with empathy all the time. I mean, you just study human nature just like writers do, but you get to act it out. Right. And I think in some weird kind of ways, at least the way I write, I do become the actor for each and every role, because I literally act out the lines
while you're writing it.
Yeah, while I'm writing it, and I dictate to an assistant, but I'm acting out the lines so I can hear it and see how they play and how they roll off my tongue, and it's what I do.
When I read one of your scripts, where I'm always astounded by the dialogue, because the dialogue is like music. I mean, your dialogue is so you've got an ear. Was that something that came naturally to you, or did you have to really work at that as a craft?
I guess it came naturally. I've never taken a writing class in my life, whereas you are. Master.
I've never had a writing class.
Oh, well, I don't know then how, because you are a master at like construction and understanding and all that, and I just work viscerally. And I think I've always paid attention to people talking around me. So I've gone to always, and I don't believe in headsets. I don't believe in ear pods. I think it's crazy that people walk around the city with them on their heads. First of all, because I think it's dangerous, with living in a city with not hearing what's around you, which is why the New York City cops now have that siren that's all bass, because they wouldn't hear the sirens. So now you can literally feel the siren vibrate on the ground. I mean, that's how crazy it got. But I've gotten to the point where I could be in a restaurant and I can overhear the conversation of the people next to me. And I could hear them without looking at them. And if what they're saying is really interesting, I'll take out a piece of paper and pen and start writing every single thing they're saying.
Oh, yeah.
And I've come across a couple of times, one story is a little bit too crass for this podcast, but I was listening to two women talk about something, and it got to the point where if I didn't hear how they answered it, I was going to say, I'm sorry, but I overheard you talking, and I need the answer.
Well, you should have bought them dessert so they keep talking, see?
Yeah, well, they kept talking. I found out what they really meant.
Well, let me ask you this, and you don't have to name names, but you've hung out with some pretty tough characters in New York.
Yeah.
And how did hanging around some criminals and gangsters inform your writing?
They have. I mean, there was a couple of instances of experiences with some of those guys that led me to write a couple of different pilots.
Okay.
So the stories have always been, I think, what's the word I'm looking for? They've been embellished in other ways.
Right.
I've made them my own. but just kind of the sheer abandonment in which they live, and they're not guided by any real rules. Also, it was kind of freeing for me to watch and understand, because I think I've employed that in some of the scripts I've written, where I think I'm clever enough now to break certain rules but get away with it because I still satisfy specific demands that need to be done. I mean, you still need a first act, second act, and a third act, but there are ways in which you can kind of really mess around with that a little bit.
Well, let me ask you, do you outline? And if you do outline, how tightly do you outline? Or do you kind of just go on your gut and wing it and then come back?
I always, a story will come into my head, I'll just see it, and even if I can explain how that happens, I would never explain it. I just keep it to myself, because I really truly don't know, but I'll just see something happen, and I will always see the beginning, middle, and end. As far as outlines go, and you can't, it's like the old Stanislavski thing. It's like, which is a little bit different, but anything is the enemy of art. So if you don't know the ending of a piece, you'll never finish it. I believe that to be the case. You have to know the ending. You have to know where you're going. I hate doing outlines, and I think because you become a slave to the outline, and I've been through that with studio executives and network executives where they want an outline. And this is when I first started in my career. And I would do the outline, and I'd write A, B, C, D, E, happens at one, and, all these. And then, you'd write the script and you'd realize, well, I don't need this character in a bar. And they'd go, where's the scene with the guy in the bar? And I'm going, well, I don't need it. And they're going, well, we liked it. And I was like, yeah, but it wasn't necessary. So I've earned the right to no longer write outlines, because also it's easier for me to just start delving into the characters and write them as I see them in my head than it is for me to bang out all the details, because then there's no fun. There's no spontaneity. And writing is difficult enough. You might as well have fun figuring out how to get from A to B to D, C to D, right? So, it's like having sex with no foreplay, basically, without being crude. I mean, it's just true. I mean, it's just, it loses all of its fun.
Well, let me ask you this. Does... when you're working on a character and all of a sudden it comes to life and they start speaking, do the characters ever get away from you? Do they start doing things you didn't expect, and you're going, wait, I'm telling this story and they want to take a left?
Well, within reason, it's right. Like I'm pretty, once I commit to the form and once I commit to what the story is and how it's being told, I don't really waver. I'm pretty committed to it. And I think you would agree that my scripts are all very tonally, very specific.
Right.
And yeah, it's the characters, because, what's the old cliched line? If one actor or if one character can say another character's line, it's a bad line. So yeah, but what's interesting is, and you and I have been through this experience together, actually. I think you remember the story, but I worked with you on a pilot, and we had to pitch it to an actress's manager. And I didn't want to do it, and because I figured, and I knew that if once we pitched it, he was still going to say, okay, when you finish the script, give it to me. I knew he wasn't going to buy anything in the room. And for the next 3 months, I couldn't write the script because all I kept seeing was that actress's face in my head. And every time I wrote the character, whose name was Chess, I would think of the actress, and I'm saying, well, who's saying this line? Is it the actress or the character? Oh. And I can't... My assistant did this recently. I'm working on a new screenplay or a pilot, and he mentioned an actor, and I said, stop. I don't want to hear it. I don't write with actors in mind. And in fact, I don't even see the actor's face. I mean, I just see silhouettes. I see how people move, how they walk, how they...
Talk.
Yeah, obviously how they talk, right. And the syntax and the rhythm and the tone of their talking and the language that they use. I've written roles for my partner, and I never even see her face. It's just a silhouette. If I see a face, I get all screwed up.
So when you get inspired to write or get hired to write, what is the first impulse? Is it theme, character, setting? And you said I see it.
Yeah, I do.
So you see it.
If I can't see it, I can't write it.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to see it.
Yeah, and it gets even worse for me. It's like I'll know the characters. Like the one I'm working on now, I have difficulty trying to figure out how to tell the story because it's not really a great story, but I think I'm turning it into something interesting. But I can't start anything until I nail the opening scene. And that sometimes could take me a couple of months before I really feel like I know what the opening scene is. And once I put down that opening scene, then the rest just flows.
Opening
'Cause I've
scene,
been
middle, and end. You
Yeah.
have to know what it is.
Right. You have to know what that is. But
Right.
for me, I can't write anything until I write that very first scene, how I introduce the story. And sometimes that could take a couple of months. But during those couple of months when I'm walking around and doing other things, that I'm still thinking about everything.
Right.
And then I've already in my head subconsciously know what all the characters are going to say or do and how they're going to react. And, you're not aware of it. But then when you start, after that first scene, it just kind of goes.
Okay. You get in a flow.
Yeah, you go into a zone too. Like you can sometimes write like 8, 10 pages in a day and you go,
What happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Have you ever, I've done this where I write in the morning and go and have lunch or work out or go for a walk and come back and in the late afternoon read it over and go, wow, I have no idea where that came from. I don't even remember writing that.
Yeah, that's definitely happened to me.
Yeah.
And then what I usually do is I dictate, and then the assistant sends it back to me, and then that afternoon I rewrite it, but then I print out everything every day. So I end up having a huge stack of paper.
And you never throw anything away.
Never,
I know that.
Never.
I've seen your
never.
office.
Well, yeah, and one of the reasons I started doing that was when I had my youngest daughter, I thought it was important for her to see that pile of paper, for her to understand that you're never going to hit the target the first time you shoot that arrow, and that it requires, reworking. So once I realized that, I always kept a pile of paper, and I never threw anything out but I save everything, in files on my computer, because every night I will print out those pages, and then I will go to a restaurant or a bar somewhere noisy, and I just kind of don't hear anything around me.
Right.
And I edit everything I do by hand. And the next morning, I always start on page 1. Even if I'm 75 pages or 80 pages into something, I start on page 1, then I get up to where I left off the night before, and I add those, and then continue on. So that's why I have such a massive amount of paper, because I always start on page 1. And after a while, you're printing out full scripts, and you're just rewriting them by hand, with, of course, a glass or two of red wine,
Well,
really...
I think amateur writers are people who aspire. A lot of people want to be a writer.
Yeah.
They just don't like writing.
Everybody wants to be a writer.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a story.
But the actual writing and all the rewriting, and you've said it, I've read a famous novelist who said, I rewrote the first chapter of the book 50 times before I landed on what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I think people that don't write, they go, wouldn't that drive you insane?
It does.
Writing something 50 times and going through and worrying about every word?
It does. And that's why, wow. Yeah, it does. And it's also much more physically exhausting and daunting than people think. They think you're just sitting on a chair and you're just writing.
Sure.
But it's not. And you actually literally have to be in shape to do it, because of the stamina required. And I think also, if you do become a writer, I've been lucky enough to say, I've been making a living on this for close to 30 years.
Right.
So I'm a lucky guy. I mean, how many people get to call themselves, it's like, I had some noisy neighbors upstairs, and they complained about my noise. And my noise was watching movies late at night or listening to music. And I remember saying, listen, all I do is write, listen to music, watch movies, and read. That's my life. I don't do anything else.
Right.
So I said, I'm sorry if my movies are a little loud, but I'll buy headphones, which I did. So now I go watch movies when I can't sleep at 2 o'clock in the morning when my headset's on. But I never understood, how people say, oh, thank God it's Friday and I'm off for the weekend. I never understood that. And I never really understood holidays except for Christmas and Thanksgiving. Then even that's a reach for me, because it's like you can't really turn off, especially when you're in the midst of writing something. It doesn't stop. So I always have paper by my bed, and I could be in intimate moments and say, hold on a second, and just
hold on, honey. I've got some dialogue.
I'll be right
here.
back.
So all the material, not all, a lot of the material that you write is dark and gritty. You write about serial killers, or you produce movies about murdering moms, and yet you are one of the funniest people I know. What strikes me about your writing, because I've read so many of your scripts, especially in the last few years, there's this very dark but very funny tone, and you achieve a balance where I find myself cringing and worrying about the character and at the same time laughing, because how do you do that? Where does that come from?
I think I do know, and I think it's from my mother, who was just really kind of crazy.
Was a serial killer?
No, well...
Murdering cheerleader mom?
There is some thought that she might have poisoned my grandparents.
Okay.
That's kind of true.
Okay.
And you read the script I wrote about that, where the inciting incident is that both my grandparents, when I was 5 years old, both died on the same night in the same bed, and my mother was ecstatic. And... because she couldn't stand them. So I think that kind of black humor stayed with me.
Okay.
I mean, I remember her once, we were in San Francisco, and her complaining about how there were no handicapped people living in San Francisco because of the hills. We actually saw a poor guy in a wheelchair trying to pull himself up a hill, and he gave up and he rolled back off the sidewalk into the middle of the street and got hit by one of those rice-a-roni trolleys. And she thought that was the funniest thing she had ever seen. I was horrified. I was like 8 years old and going, oh my God, that guy just got killed. And she was laughing.
So that comes from your mom.
Yeah, it sure does.
Was she a storyteller?
No, but she was a voracious reader. Although she only read Reader's Digest versions of books, like those
where they condensed them.
Versions. Yes, that's also read. Even as a kid, I thought it was weird.
But when you write, again, I've read so many of your scripts. There's this very dark undertone, and yet it's funny. And what I really admire is tone is the most ineffable element when writing.
You really can't teach
We
that.
can talk plot, we can talk character, but tone, and to hit the right tone and then maintain that for the entire script, that's really a gift.
Well, I think, I don't watch much TV. I watch primarily movies.
Okay.
At least 5 or 7 a week. And, there are a bunch of movies that I've seen which is so tonally consistent and really extraordinary. How the director, like Body Heat,
Right.
that steam, that heat, that sweat all through New Orleans. Or like Angel Heart, the eeriness of that movie.
Right.
Just those two off the top of my head, Orson Welles' movie, like Third Man, they're so tonally consistent that, it's kind of breathtaking. And you try to incorporate that into the action lines and the description of things and people in the scripts that I'm working on.
So when you were developing Dexter,
Yeah.
did you have nightmares about murdering people or dismembering them? Or were you?
No,
Okay.
no, I don't, just like an actor doesn't have to kill somebody to know what it's like to kill somebody. I mean, but the difficult thing with that was, I don't think I'll ever do it again, was that it was based on a novel, which wasn't my novel.
Graphic novel or a novel?
No, novel.
A novel.
And that has a beginning, middle, and end of novel. There was no continuation. The story ended.
Right.
And I had to deconstruct that novel to make it my own. And then recreate the characters so that they all lasted for 8 years. Give them enough DNA in the pilot so that you knew where they were all going. And that took me a little while just to break it down. I remember my EP partners saying, well, where's the script? And I'm like, I'm still working on it, But then when I wrote it very quickly. And I'll never forget when I handed it in, the head of Showtime at the time called me up and he said, I have a few notes, nothing seismic. And I'll never forget that line because that told me that he wasn't asking me to restructure anything. And that for a writer is, win a chicken dinner, right? It's like if you have to restructure, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So, I showed up and he gave me a few notes and it literally, I'm going to say it. It literally took me like maybe 50 minutes to do those notes, but I sat on it for 2 weeks, so they thought it took me 2 weeks. And then I sent it in, and then, I was lucky. I think the things that have happened for me, they happen very quickly or they don't happen, and that happened very quickly.
But you were talking about structure, and it's true. All those years of doing sitcoms, and you go to the table read, and it's not working. If it's structural, you're there all night.
Yeah.
You pull in an all-nighter, and you're restructured, you're beating out the second act. You could change every line of dialogue. You can change the settings because you're not messing with. If the structure's solid, it's like having a cake that's baked.
Yeah.
And you can change the icing and the rosettes on the icing. That's easy. But as long as you're not dealing with structure, it's usually a pretty good rewrite.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of executives don't really understand that.
Right.
And, when you're dealing with an executive, you could tell two things. One, they just took that course from McKee, who's
Right.
done more damage to screenwriters than anybody, one person in this entire world. You could tell because of the way they say, well, what's the backstory? It's like, oh, for God's sakes.
I'm sorry, I've got to interrupt you for one story.
Yeah.
I know this story.
Yeah.
And you were writing a horror pilot for a series, and the executive asked you, said, well, what is the inciting incident? You remember? And he goes, so what is the inciting? Would you tell me
this guy had the script for 6 months.
Okay.
And 3 days before the start of production, I was already down in South Carolina doing pre-pro, which is where the show is made. And 3 days before principal photography, and the director still hadn't even shown up yet. So I had to pick everything, And I had it all lined up in the production designer's office saying, these are the curtains, these are the locations, these are the props, And he's like, yeah, great, thank you. But the executive at the network called me up and he goes, I have a problem with the script. This is 3 days before. And I said, what's the problem? And he said, there's no inciting incident. I said, well, within the first 5 pages, I have a little boy jump on a priest and bite his face off. That to me is a pretty good inciting incident. And he actually said to me, I read a lot of books. I read a lot of magazines. I watch a lot of TV and movies. I know what I'm talking about. And I said, well, you know what? I think I better start reading a lot of books, a lot of magazines, watch a lot of movies and TV so I can learn. And I hung up. I mean, what else was I going to do? I mean,
I like
was
that.
So absurd. I couldn't even wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I've talked to other writers that work with the networks, and you get notes like, "Oh, it needs more legs," or "The second act needs more personality." I had one network executive say, "It just needs to be a little more autumnal," and I did, like autumn-like in its
autumnal.
Autumnal, and I went. Autumnal what? and so as opposed to, guys, nothing happens in this scene. Nothing changes. Let's cut it. Okay, let's just get down to storytelling.
I think you and I are similar in that capacity as well. It's like, don't tell me you don't like something unless you have something better to replace it. Because if you do that, you're nothing but a dilettante and you don't know what you're talking about. Therefore, I'm not listening to you. I mean, I'll steal from anybody. I'll ask anybody. On the set, if I get jammed up, I'll ask the AD, I'll ask the prop guy. I don't care. If they have an idea, I'll use it. If their ideas are dumb, I never ask them again. But it's like, why not? We're all in this together. Right. You might as well, include everybody. It's one big party. I mean, we're grown men and women telling stories and making good money on it. So what's the complication? Right?
Well, I want to talk about Little Ellie Claus.
Yeah.
All these dark dramas and murderers and serial killers. And when I read Little Ellie Claus, it's one of the sweetest novels I've ever read. It's a period piece about an orphan girl who is adopted by Santa Claus.
Correct.
And when I read this, I went, the creator of Dexter wrote this novel? How did that happen? It's so sweet. I actually, 3 times while reading this novel, I teared up.
Yeah, well, I teared up writing it. I mean, I'm one of those guys that will cry or laugh when I'm writing, which maybe most people don't do, but I do. I don't really care. I'm alone anyway. So, I had 3 children. They were, they must have been, like 10, 9, and 8, that kind of thing. And I remember taking them ice skating here in the city, and after ice skating, I just started making up this story, and they were really. I was just making it off the top of my head.
You're telling your kids the story.
Yeah, I just kind of started making it up in my own head.
Improvising.
Yeah, but this husband and wife coming from Iowa and this jalopy coming into New York City during the Depression. They had all these pets and animals. He's going to be a veterinarian. And then, of course, the veterinarian job is kind of thrown out the window because of the Depression. And, they're left on hard times. He finally gets a job, And she ends up being a single mom and she can't raise her kids. So she puts the kid in front of an orphanage door, hoping the nuns will raise her. And Santa's flying overhead, delivering gifts, and he hears a baby crying. And the further he leaves New York, the baby cries kept getting louder and louder until he says, oh, screw it. And he circles back and lands in front of the orphanage. And he sees a little girl in a in a basket like Moses, wrapped up. And there's a note in this saying, please raise my beautiful little daughter Ellie in the palm of God's hands. And he's looking at the door, the note, the door, the note, the door, the note, until he finally throws the kid in the back of the sled, goes right back to the North Pole with this little baby in his arms. And all the people up there, because normal people up there living in my version of the North Pole, and elves and all these other people. And they're like, what are you doing? Because they're all smoking cigars and drinking. It's their one night off. And he says, never mind that. Where's my wife, Charlotte? They said, well, she's in the kitchen. And he walks into the kitchen. She sees him holding a baby. And she says, what are you doing, Santa? You're supposed to be out delivering gifts. And he says, you know what, Charlotte, all these thousands of years, all these millions of kids that we've taken care of, you and I never had our own. And I want to raise her as my own. And they do. Until Ellie's now 11 years old. And she discovers that her real mom's still alive, living in New York. And she's really upset. She never knew. And she splits the North Pole. And Santa's not having Christmas until he gets his daughter back. And that's basically
the sweep of the story. It's so
and
so
what was
sweet.
really interesting was I started telling them just kind of like the way the old tradition of telling stories, and they kind of stay with you. And it wasn't until I had Ellie, about my youngest daughter, until about 6 years later did I write the novel.
Really?
Yeah.
But
And
it was gestating.
It
was there.
I think so, because I wrote it really fast. And it's funny because a lot of people would read and go, at Manos, I didn't know you had a heart. And I would laugh at that. And I'd say, I think I know who I am. I knew I had a heart. I mean, just because I wrote some stuff that was kind of down and dirty, I didn't mean I couldn't do anything else. I mean, that's the one thing in Hollywood when you get pigeonholed.
Right.
If you write thrillers, that's what you get hired to
Right.
do. And I have never done that. I've written all the different genres, so.
Well, I encourage anyone, if you can find it anywhere online or in a bookstore, Little Ellie Kloss is a wonderful read. It opens your heart. It really does.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the plugs. So thank you.
Do I get my 10%?
Yeah, you get
Okay. I tell my students at Columbia, I have a quote. I say, doubt is the writer's constant companion. And by that, I mean doubt is that little demon that sits on your shoulder, right, and whispers in your ear, this isn't any good. Why are you wasting your time? No one's going to, you're not smart enough to write this. And every morning I have to wake up, bat that little demon off my shoulder and write. Because if not, he'll get in my head.
Yeah.
Do you have a demon? Or how? Well, we don't have enough time for all your demons.
No, you don't.
No.
But who
Okay.
does for anybody? I mean,
Right.
everybody's got demons. If you
Right.
don't, you're missing something. It's funny you say that because I was taught about doubt in a very different kind of way, but it's almost the same. The phrase I was taught, and it was taught to me by somebody in the intelligence agencies, said, when there's doubt, there's no doubt. So that's saying trust your instincts. So
Right.
it's the same thing it's like, well, if I have doubt, then I know there's something wrong with that line.
Right.
And for me, it's like walking into a restaurant. And if I feel furry, I walk out. I don't stay somewhere,
Right.
But it's the same thing. I mean, it's just you have to trust your instincts. And if you have that id or super ego on either side of your shoulders, which is interesting because that's a technique I'm using in the pilot right now, where I have
Yes.
the actor, and then you see him as a superego and him as the id,
Right.
talking to him, saying, yeah, do that. The other one's going, don't do that, that kind of thing. Seems to be working. I don't know. You'll have to read and let me know. But
Okay, I will.
but yeah, that's true. You have to trust your instincts.
When that little demon got to me was early on in the writing of Glimpses. When I was writing the essays for the book, I was having some doubt, and I sent you some of the early drafts of the essays. And I remember the email. I said, Manos, be honest.
Yeah.
Am I insane? Tell me if I'm insane.
And do you remember what I wrote back?
I just know it was so encouraging and so supportive that I had the confidence, and I felt empowered enough to finish the book.
Well, I appreciate that because I didn't really say anything other than after reading like 7 or 8 of those essays, I was absolutely stunned. And I was absolutely floored by how sweet, sensitive, and insightful by you taking the mundane and turning him into something that was so much more spiritually profound was absolutely brilliant. And I can't wait till the book is published because I already promised that book to like 40 people
Good.
not 40.
Good.
I know about maybe 10 in my life, but at least of the 10 people I know. But it was so full of hope And I remember writing back to you saying, I feel better. I just feel better. I feel more hopeful. I feel more loving. I feel more kind. It had that impact on me.
Good.
And I think it will on everybody who reads it, because they are just they're so beautifully crafted and written and so precise in what you're trying to say in each and every essay, which is all uniquely different from the essay you just read. So it's one of those books where you read like 4 or 5 essays and then you feel like going for a walk and saying, you know what, that tree is pretty. You know,
Good.
that person is not a bad person. And that's really what it did to me. So I couldn't wait to get the next chapters, and I couldn't wait to read what you were writing next, because I think it's going to be a blockbuster for you. I mean, I really do. I think it's great.
Well, thank you. But there was a pure intent behind writing it, and that was to open hearts, to encourage kindness, celebrate compassion, and just encourage people to look around their daily lives and catch a little glimpse of God.
Yeah.
And by that, it's tenderness, moments of grace, kindness.
Yeah. Well, kindness is, I think the older I get, the more understanding and value the importance of just simple acts of kindness.
Yes.
And, something happened to me about 4 years ago where I could no longer bear seeing fear in people's eyes. And to this day, if I see that, it just bothers me no end. And I'll try to do something to get rid of that look in their eyes. Mm. And it reminds me, I guess when I first graduated college, of course, to make money, I started waitering. And, I got fired both times. I worked at 2 different restaurants because I apparently made the patrons nervous. I moved too fast. It was like, well, they want the ketchup. I'll get the ketchup really quickly. And that apparently is not the way to do it. So I never went back the third time. But what I realized back then, all these young kids, we were all young at the time, 21, 22, that the restaurant became their family more than their career, right?
Right.
But the thing that really hit me was the way domination works. It's like the restaurant theory of life, where, waiters come in and they treat the busboys like garbage, and then the bartender comes in and treats the waiters like garbage, then the general manager comes in and treats the bartender like garbage, then the owner comes in and treats the manager like garbage, and then the public comes in and treats everybody like garbage. Uh-huh. And it's kind of like there's this incessant and almost overriding zeal in people to dominate others in one way or another. It's happening now in our culture.
Of course.
This whole woke culture thing, this kind of divide where everybody is trying to step on everybody else's toes. And, it just makes no sense to me. Why? So, I think that theory of the restaurant is kind of apt these days.
So when you go about your day in New York, do you see little glimpses of God?
Oh, yeah, especially after reading your book. And then I started reading more books about God and the interconnectivity of this universe. And I've recently been undergoing some experiences, both medically and psychologically, that is getting me closer to having the same kind of profound understanding of the universality of this world, the universal mind, and how everything is all ultimately connected. And I think I sent you some pictures of the James Webb, which
incredible.
And there was one where they just found, I can't remember the name of it, it was called a supernova, but there's another name for it, which I can't remember right now. But it literally looked like 3 babies in the embryonic sac. And I'm going, that could be me.
Right.
That could be me. Or could be my sister, or it could be one of my kids. It happened hundreds and hundreds of billions of years ago. It's just remarkable. And, it's like my father and all the other scientists I met when I was a kid growing up, they were all profoundly religious. And you don't think about those people that way. But from my understanding, it was that they all spend their lives trying to understand chaos. And when they uncover how it works, they go, not only is this beautiful, not only does it work perfectly, but it's beautiful. And we didn't do this.
Right.
So they start looking at the world a bit more differently.
Okay, I want to talk about Los Angeles.
Oh.
Not the town, not the it is the city of angels.
Yeah.
Is that an oxymoron?
Yeah.
You're driving in your car.
Yeah.
And you hear on the radio, You know which story I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I would like for you to share that story because when you told me, I went, now come on, Manos, is this the writer making up some crap? And you were so convincing. I would love for you to share that story.
Yeah, that's a true story. I've had two of those, maybe three, but I did tell you about that one. I was finishing. Fortunately, my line producer found enough money to keep me in L.A. during the edit. I mean, it was cool. So I got to live in L.A. and stay with the edit. But I was living in the Magic Hotel, which is right next to the Magic Castle on, I believe it's Fountain Avenue.
Fountain.
Yeah,
right.
and it was like a one-bedroom, with a kitchen and bath. And it was a very odd place. You would drive underground, and the guy at the front desk, as soon as I walked into my apartment, would call and say, "Everything okay, James?" It's like, "Are you watching it?" Anyway, I was going through a terrible, terrible divorce, my first one, which was they never are pretty. And I remember one day before going to the office, I was brushing my teeth. And as I was brushing my teeth, my toilet bowl literally just exploded. I mean, just like the whole porcelain thing just broke into hundreds of pieces and water started pummeling out like it's a geyser. I remember just very calmly looking at it and saying, "What the hell?" And I calmly walked into the living room. I called up that crazy old man down at the front desk and I said, "My toilet bowl just exploded. It's flooding my apartment. I got to go." And I left. I just seemed to something was happening to me. And I got in my car and I was driving down Hollywood Boulevard, going to the old Goldwyn Studios on Santa Monica. And I was listening to the oldies radio station. There was some oldie playing. And in the middle of the song, it stopped. And I heard this unbelievably mellifluous, beautiful voice, a man's voice saying, "Hey, I just want you to know I'm listening to you. And then I want to remind you that I can't remember all the exact words, but I want to remind you that, for all the terrible things you read every day in the headlines of the newspapers and all the terrible articles and all the terrible things you hear and people say and do on TV, you have to remember that there are millions of moments in this world in which great acts of kindness and love exist. And that, just remember, I'm always listening, I'm always here." And it went on a couple more seconds, and then all of a sudden the song just picked up where it stopped. And I'm in my car, and I'm saying, "What the hell is that?" And I got to my office, and I immediately grabbed and I said, "You call up that station manager, and you find out if there was any kind of public address announcements, get the playlist. I want to see what the playlist, if there was any of this interstitial thing going on." She got the playlist. And she said, "There's nothing here." And I literally got the station manager and I said, "I don't want you to think I'm crazy, but this is what happened today on your radio station." He goes, "Not when I was listening." I went, "Oh, no."
Who knew the Almighty was a DJ?
He was a DJ that day. I mean, he comes in a lot of different forms. I mean, I remember once being on the IRT like around midnight. This was when I was directing plays in the city in the early 80s. And I remember walking onto the crowded train and I saw this woman. She must have been Caribbean. She had that beautiful, older, in her 60s, 70s. She had that beautiful caramel skin and it was glistening. And she just had just a Mona Lisa kind of spot.
Got it.
And I remember locking eyes with her and never feeling more at peace in my life. And I stared at her for 45 straight minutes. I was up against the door, not touching it, but standing by the door with my hand on the hook. And all of a sudden, the doors opened, and I broke my gaze. It was my stop. And I got off. And I never broke connection with that woman. And I was convinced it was the Virgin Mary. I just was. I just went, something happened there. So, yeah, I wish I had that more often.
Well, there's great mystery and majesty in the universe.
Yeah, you bet. And you brought it out in your book.
Good. And I truly believe it's all connected, that spirit connects everything.
Yeah.
Manos, I could talk to you forever.
I could talk to you forever, and I always learn a lot from you. So, it's always my pleasure.
Well, I want to thank you first and foremost for being my friend.
Well, thank you. I feel the same exact way. I'm grateful.
And thank you for being on Glimpses.
Well, I appreciate that, too.
All right.
God bless you, Matt.
Well, that's it for this podcast. Thank you for joining us. As you go about your day and you're out and about, just take the time to look around and catch a glimpse.